I won't touch you unless you ask. Those were the first words the farmer spoke when he took 19-year-old Nora Wynne as payment for a debt. She'd been sold like livestock by her drunken uncle, expecting the worst kind of hell. But Silas Rourke, weathered, widowed, and wounded, offered something she'd never known: mercy. What happened next in that frozen farmhouse would break her heart, rebuild her soul, and prove that love can bloom even in the cruelest winter. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The winter of 1880 came to Dust Hollow like a curse wrapped in ice. It wasn't the kind of cold that nipped at your fingers or reddened your cheeks. It was the bone-deep, soul-stealing cold that made people mean, made them desperate, made them do things they'd carry to their graves. Nora Wynne had learned that lesson early. At 19 years old, she'd already lived 3 lifetimes' worth of cruelty. Her face, though young, carried shadows that didn't belong to someone who should have been dreaming about dances and courtship. Her hands were cracked and calloused, her shoulders permanently hunched from years of flinching. She'd stopped looking people in the eye around age 14, the same year her parents died of fever, and she'd been dumped on her uncle's doorstep like an unwanted package. Uncle Martin Wynne was a man who drowned whatever decency he'd been born with in cheap whiskey and cheaper choices. His cabin, if you could call it that, sat at the edge of town like a wounded animal waiting to die. 3 rooms, all of them cold. Walls so thin you could hear the wind laughing at you. A roof that leaked melted snow into rusted buckets that Nora had to empty every morning, her fingers going numb before she could finish. "Girl, where's my goddamn breakfast?" Martin's voice cut through the morning silence like a saw blade. Nora was already awake. She was always awake before him, had been for 5 years. Sleep was a luxury she'd learned to steal in 15-minute intervals, always listening for his footsteps, always ready to move. She'd been crouched by the dying fire, trying to coax enough heat from the embers to warm water for coffee. The kindling was damp. Everything was always damp in this house, and her fingers were already bleeding from splinters. She'd wrapped them in strips of cloth torn from her only other dress, but the blood was seeping through. "Coming, Uncle Martin," she called back, her voice barely above a whisper. Volume had been beaten out of her years ago. She heard him stumble out of his room, kicking something, probably an empty bottle, across the floor. The sound of his morning cough rattled through the walls like death clearing its throat. Nora worked faster, her hand shaking not just from cold, but from the familiar fear that lived in her stomach like a second heartbeat. The coffee was weak. They'd been stretching the same grounds for 3 days, but it was hot. She poured it into the chipped mug he always used and set it on the table just as he lurched through the doorway. Martin Wynne looked like what happened when a man gave up on being human. His beard was matted and stained, his clothes hung on him like rags on a scarecrow, and his eyes, God, his eyes were the worst part. They were mean eyes, calculating eyes. The kind of eyes that looked at his dead brother's daughter and saw nothing but an inconvenience. "This all there is?" He gestured at the coffee with disgust. "Yes, sir. I can make some porridge if there's what? If there's food? You think food just appears out of thin air, girl?" He took a gulp of coffee and grimaced. "Tastes like piss." "I'm sorry, Uncle Martin." "You're always sorry. Sorry don't pay bills. Sorry don't put food on the table." He slumped into his chair, and the wood groaned under his weight. "You know what today is?" Nora's heart dropped. She knew. Of course she knew. She'd been counting the days with dread. "Tuesday, sir." "Tuesday. That's right. And you know who comes on Tuesday?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. "Silas Rourke comes on Tuesday. Every Tuesday for the past 3 months, he comes for his money. Money I owe him for that seed loan last spring. Money I don't have because the crop failed and the winter came early and everything's gone to hell." He looked up at her then, and something shifted in his expression, something that made Nora's blood run cold. "But I got something else to give him." "Uncle Martin, please." "Please what? Please don't do what? I ain't said nothing yet." But his smile said everything. "Though I suppose you're smart enough to guess." Nora took a step backward, her body moving on instinct. "You can't." "Can't." He laughed, and it was the ugliest sound she'd ever heard. "Girl, I can do whatever I want. You're eating my food, burning my firewood, taking up space in my house. You're a debt I've been carrying for 5 years, and today I'm going to square that account. I'll work harder. I'll find work in town. I can clean houses or ain't nobody in this town got money to hire help. And even if they did, what makes you think they'd hire you? You're nobody, Nora. You're nothing. You got no family except me, no prospects, no future. At least with Rourke, you'll have a roof over your head. He's twice my age. So what? He's got a farm? Got 2 kids who need tending after his wife died. He needs someone, and I need to clear my debt. It's perfect. It's not perfect, it's... She caught herself before she said evil. You didn't call Martin Wynne evil to his face. Not if you wanted to keep your teeth. But he saw it in her eyes anyway. You ungrateful little wretch. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward. After everything I've done for you, taking you in when nobody else would, feeding you, keeping you out of the cold, feeding her scraps, keeping her like a dog in a shed. But Nora bit her tongue and said nothing. Silas Rourke is a good man, Martin continued, his voice dripping with false righteousness. Better than you deserve, that's for damn sure. You'll go with him today, and you'll be grateful for it. Understand? Nora wanted to run, wanted to bolt out the door and disappear into the snow, and let the cold take her because at least that would be her choice. But where would she go? She had no money, no warm clothes, no friends. She'd freeze within an hour. She was trapped, and they both knew it. I said, "Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good." He righted his chair and sat back down. "Now get out of my sight till he gets here, and clean yourself up. You look like something the dog dragged in." Nora fled to the small corner of the cabin that served as her room, though room was generous. It was more like a closet with a thin blanket and a wooden crate for her belongings. She sat on the floor, her back against the wall, and tried not to cry. She'd heard stories about Silas Rourke. Everyone in Dust Hollow had. He was one of the few farmers who'd survived the hard times, though just barely. A quiet man, they said. Kept to himself after his wife Hope died birthing their second child 3 years ago. Raised those 2 kids alone in a farmhouse 5 miles outside town. Worked from sunup to sundown and barely broke even most years. Some folks said he was kind. Others said he was just worn down. Nora didn't know which was worse. What she did know was that she'd heard the way men talked about young wives, the way they laughed about wedding nights and broken-in brides. She'd seen the bruises on Widow Hatcher's wrists after she remarried. She'd heard the screams coming from the Johnsons' cabin after their daughter got married at 16. She knew what happened to girls who got sold off to desperate men, and she knew there was nothing she could do to stop it. Silas Rourke arrived at exactly 10 o'clock, like he did every Tuesday. Nora heard his horse before she saw him, the heavy clip-clop of hooves on frozen ground. She was standing by the window, her few belongings wrapped in a flour sack at her feet. She'd put on her only other dress, a gray thing that had been her mother's, altered and re-altered until it barely fit. It was clean, at least. She'd scrubbed it raw the night before, as if cleanliness could somehow protect her from what was coming. Martin was already at the door, that false smile plastered on his face. "Silas, right on time, as always. Come in, come in. Too cold to stand out there." The man who stepped through the doorway was not what Nora had expected. She'd pictured someone like her uncle, slovenly, mean-eyed, broken, but Silas Rourke was something different. He was tall, probably in his late 30s, with shoulders that spoke of hard labor, and a face that had been handsome once before life carved lines around his eyes and mouth. His clothes were worn but clean, patched but not ragged. His beard was trimmed. His hands, when he removed his gloves, were calloused but scrubbed. He looked tired, bone-tired, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. His eyes swept the cabin, taking in the squalor, the cold, the desperate poverty that clung to every surface. Then they landed on Nora, and she saw something flicker in them. Surprise, maybe, or concern. "Martin." His voice was quiet, rough from disuse. "I'm here for the payment." "About that, Silas." Martin's smile widened, and Nora felt her stomach turn. "I don't have the money. Not in coin, anyway." Silas's jaw tightened. "We had an agreement." I know, and I'm a man of my word. That's why I got something else for you, something better than money." He gestured towards Nora like a merchant showing off goods. "My niece. Pretty thing, ain't she? Young, healthy, good with housework. She'll cook, clean, tend your kids." Everything you need. The silence that followed was suffocating. Nora couldn't look up, couldn't breathe. She felt like livestock being inspected at market. When Silas finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. You're offering me a person to settle a debt. Well, when you put it like that, that's exactly what I'm putting it like. Silas took a step forward, and Martin actually backed up. You're trying to trade your niece like she's a sack of grain. Now, Silas, be reasonable. I don't want to hear it. Silas's hand moved to the door, and for one wild moment, Nora thought he was going to leave. Thought he was going to walk out and let her uncle figure out some other way to ruin her life. But then his eyes found hers again, and what she saw there made her breath catch. It wasn't lust. It wasn't greed. It was something worse and better and more complicated. It was recognition. Like he saw something in her that he knew from his own reflection. Something broken, something barely hanging on. The girl, he said slowly, not taking his eyes off Nora. What's your name? Nora, sir. Nora Wynne. Nora. He said it like he was testing the weight of it. How old are you? 19, sir. And this is what you want? To come work on my farm? The question hung in the air. Martin was already nodding eagerly, ready to answer for her, but Silas held up a hand. I'm asking her. Nora's mind raced. What did she want? She wanted to be anywhere but here. She wanted to be warm and fed and safe. She wanted to not be afraid every time she heard footsteps. But was Silas Rourke's farm any better than this frozen hell? Her voice cracked. I don't know, sir. Honest answer. Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. He turned back to Martin. She's got bruises on her wrists. She's clumsy, always falling. Don't lie to me, Martin. I've seen enough bruises to know how they're made. Silas's voice went quiet again, and somehow that was more frightening than if he'd shouted. You been hitting her? That ain't none of your concern. It is if you're trying to hand her over to me. Silas looked back at Nora, and this time she forced herself to meet his gaze. I won't touch you, he said, and the words were clearly meant for her alone. Not unless you ask. That's a promise. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't know if she could trust him, didn't know if she could trust anyone, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She couldn't stay here. I'll go, she whispered. Nora, you don't have to. I'll go, she said louder, and this time there was something like determination in her voice. If you'll have me, Mr. Rourke, I'll come work on your farm. Silas studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. Get your things. She ain't got much, Martin interjected cheerfully, already moving toward the door like he couldn't wait to be rid of her. Just that sack there. Light traveling, eh, Nora? She picked up her flour sack without answering. Everything she owned in the world fit in that small bundle. 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a carved wooden horse her father had made her when she was 7. That was it. 19 years of life reduced to objects that weighed less than a newborn lamb. Silas watched her shoulder the bag, and she saw his jaw tighten again. That all? Yes, sir. Got a coat? No, sir. He muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse. Then he turned to Martin, and the look on his face could have frozen water. The debt's settled. Don't ever come asking me for another favor, Martin Wynne. And if I hear you've taken in another niece or cousin or any other relation just to treat them like you treated this girl, we're going to have a very different kind of conversation. Martin's false smile slipped. Now, Silas, we're done here. Silas opened the door, letting in a blast of winter air that made Nora gasp. Then he did something unexpected. He took off his own coat, heavy wool lined with rabbit fur, and draped it over her shoulders. Put this on. It's 5 miles to the farm, and the temperature's dropping. The coat was warm, so warm. It smelled like wood smoke and horses, and something clean she couldn't name. Nora pulled it tight around herself and felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, she managed. Save your thanks till you see the place, Silas said, but there was no meanness in it. It ain't much, but it's better than this. He led her outside to where his horse waited, a sturdy bay mare with patient eyes. Silas swung up into the saddle first, then reached down. Give me your hand. Nora hesitated. She'd never ridden a horse before. Never been close to one, really. They were big and powerful and completely outside her small world of cabin floors and cold hearths. "I won't drop you," Silas said quietly. "I promise." She took his hand. It was rough and warm and strong, and when he pulled her up behind him with seemingly effortless strength, she had to grab onto his shirt to keep from falling. He smelled like his coat, clean and solid and real. "Hold on," he said. "We got a ways to go." Nora wrapped her arms around his waist. Her face pressed against his back, and felt the horse begin to move. Behind them, Martin's cabin grew smaller and smaller, and she didn't look back. Didn't need to. Whatever was ahead of her, it couldn't be worse than what she was leaving behind. At least, that's what she told herself as they rode into the blizzard that was gathering on the horizon. The snow started falling about a mile out from town. Small flakes at first, almost pretty, dancing in the weak afternoon light. But within minutes, it turned into something else entirely. A wall of white that swallowed the world. Nora had never been outside town before. Never had reason to. Now riding through the storm on the back of Silas Rourke's horse, she realized how small her world had been. There was nothing out here but snow and wind and the occasional dark shape of a tree looming through the white. No houses, no people, no shelter, just empty land stretching forever. She was shaking from cold, from fear, from the sheer overwhelming wrongness of everything that had happened in the last hour. She'd been sold, given away like property, carried off by a stranger who'd promised not to touch her. But what did promises mean? What did anything mean anymore? "You all right back there?" Silas's voice barely cut through the wind. "Yes, sir," she lied. "Don't lie. I can feel you shaking." "I'm cold. We're almost there, another mile or so." He shifted slightly, and she felt him press something into her hands, a flask. "Drink, just a sip. It'll warm you." Nora uncapped the flask and took a small drink. It wasn't whiskey like she'd expected. It was something sweet, almost like honey mixed with fire. It burned going down, but in a good way, spreading warmth through her chest. "What is it?" "Mead. My wife used to make it." He paused. "Used to." There was a weight to those words, a grief so old it had worn smooth. Nora took another small sip and handed the flask back. "Thank you. Keep it. You need it more than I do." They rode in silence after that. Nora focused on staying upright, on keeping her arms locked around Silas's waist, on breathing through the cold that seemed determined to freeze her lungs. She thought about her uncle, probably already celebrating his freedom from her. She thought about the farm ahead, about the two motherless children she'd heard about the man whose back she was pressed against, and the promise he'd made. "I won't touch you unless you ask." Why would he say that? Why would any man make such a promise? "There," Silas said suddenly, pointing ahead. "That's home." Through the snow, Nora could just make out a dark shape. A farmhouse, she realized, with a barn beside it and a few smaller structures she couldn't identify. It wasn't much, like he'd warned. The house looked like it had been built by someone who valued function over beauty, and time had not been kind to it. But smoke was rising from the chimney, and there was a light in one window, and after Martin's frozen hovel, it looked almost welcoming. Silas guided the horse to the barn and dismounted. Then he reached up for Nora, his hand steady on her waist as he lifted her down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. She'd been holding on so tight for so long that her muscles had locked up. "Easy," Silas said, keeping one hand on her elbow until she steadied. "Take a minute." "I'm fine." "You're frozen half to death. Come on." He grabbed her flour sack in one hand and guided her toward the house with the other, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd made this walk 10,000 times. The front door opened before they reached it, and two small faces peered out, a boy and a girl, both with their father's dark hair and their mother's delicate features. The boy looked about 8, the girl maybe 5. They stared at Nora with wide, suspicious eyes. "Papa?" the boy said. "Who's that?" "Her name's Nora," Silas said, steering her inside and shutting the door against the wind. "She's going to be staying with us for a while. Nora, these are my children, Thomas and Millie." "Hello," Nora managed, her teeth chattering too hard for anything more eloquent. The children didn't respond. just kept staring like she was something strange and possibly dangerous that their father had dragged in from the storm. The house was warmer than Martin's cabin, but not by much. Nora could see why. The fireplace was burning, but barely, and cold air was seeping through gaps in the walls. Still, it was shelter. It was something. "Thomas, get some more wood on that fire," Silas ordered. "Millie, bring one of the blankets from my room." The children scattered to obey, and Silas led Nora to a chair near the hearth. She sank into it, still wrapped in his coat, and watched as he moved around the room with quiet purpose, stoking the fire, lighting 2 more oil lamps, filling a kettle with water from a bucket. "I'll make tea," he said. "Warm you up proper." "You don't have to." "I do. You're blue around the lips." He glanced at her as he set the kettle on a hook over the fire. "When's the last time you ate something hot?" Nora tried to remember. "Yesterday morning, maybe? Thin porridge that was more water than oats." "I don't recall, sir." "Stop calling me sir. Name's Silas." He moved to a cupboard and pulled out a loaf of bread, some cheese, dried meat. Not much, but it's food. Her stomach cramped at the sight of it. Real food, more than scraps and burnt edges. "I can work for it," she said quickly. "I can cook and clean and—" "Nora." He turned to look at her, and his expression was strange, somewhere between tired and sad and something else she couldn't name. "You don't have to earn your supper. You're not a servant. You're— Hell, I don't know what you are, but you're not that." "Then what am I?" It was the question that had been burning in her chest since the moment he'd pulled her up onto his horse. What was she to him? A debt payment? A housekeeper? Something worse? Silas was quiet for a long moment, his hand stilling on the knife he'd been using to cut the bread. "I don't rightly know yet," he finally said, "but we'll figure it out, one day at a time." It wasn't the answer she'd wanted, but it was honest. That had to count for something. Millie returned with the blanket, a patchwork quilt that had seen better days but was clean and thick. She handed it to her father without looking at Nora, then scurried back to stand next to Thomas, both of them watching from the shadows like nervous animals. Silas draped the quilt over Nora's shoulders, layering warmth on top of warmth. Then he handed her a plate with bread, cheese, and meat. "Eat, slow, or you'll make yourself sick." Nora ate. She tried to go slow like he'd said, but God, she was so hungry. The bread was dense and filling, the cheese sharp and real, the meat salty and perfect. She couldn't remember the last time she'd tasted anything so good. "Thank you," she whispered. "You said that already." "I mean it." "I know." He poured tea from the kettle, black and strong and sweetened with something, and handed her the cup. Their fingers brushed, and she flinched without meaning to. Silas noticed. Of course he noticed. He stepped back, putting distance between them, and something that looked like pain crossed his face. "The children will show you where you'll sleep," he said quietly. "There's a room off the kitchen, used to be Hope's sewing room. It ain't big, but it's got a door that locks. From the inside," and he added, and the emphasis made her throat tight. He was giving her a room with a lock, protection, privacy, proof that his promise hadn't been empty. "I don't know what Martin told you about me," Silas continued, not quite meeting her eyes. "But I ain't him. I ain't gonna hurt you, Nora. You got my word on that." "Why?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "I don't. But I know what it looks like when someone's been beaten down past breaking, and I know what it's like to be alone in this world." He finally looked at her, and she saw something raw in his eyes, something that looked like recognition. Maybe that's enough. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The fire crackled. The children whispered to each other in the shadows. And Nora Wynne, sold off like livestock and carried through a blizzard to a stranger's house, felt something crack open in her chest, something that might have been hope, or might have been the beginning of trust, or might have just been exhaustion finally winning the war against her fear. "Thank you," she said again, because she didn't know what else to say. Silas just nodded. "Finish your food, then get some rest. Tomorrow's going to come early, and there's work to be done." He was right about that. Tomorrow would come, whether she was ready or not. But for the first time in 5 years, Nora wasn't walking toward tomorrow alone. She was being carried, on a stranger's horse, wrapped in a stranger's coat, sitting in a stranger's house. And maybe, just maybe, that stranger was something other than cruel. Only time would tell. Nora woke to the sound of a child crying. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The darkness was different here, thicker somehow, but not threatening. The air smelled like wood smoke and something else, something clean she couldn't quite place. Then memory flooded back. The cabin, her uncle, the farmer who'd taken her in payment of a debt, the ride through the blizzard, the promise he'd made. I won't touch you unless you ask. The crying continued, muffled but persistent, coming from somewhere beyond her locked door. Nora sat up slowly, her body aching from yesterday's cold ride. The room Silas had given her was small, just as he'd said, barely large enough for the narrow bed and a wooden chest, but it had a window with real curtains and walls that didn't leak wind. Luxury, compared to what she'd left behind. She fumbled in the darkness until she found the oil lamp and matches on the chest. The flame caught, throwing warm light across rough-hewn walls. According to the small clock on the windowsill, it was just past 4 in the morning. Still dark outside, the window showing nothing but her own reflection and the black promise of more snow. The crying had stopped, replaced by voices. Silas's low rumble and a child's higher pitch, though she couldn't make out words. Nora pulled the quilt around her shoulders and pressed her ear to the door, listening. "Don't want her here, Papa." That was Thomas, the boy. "She's going to try to replace Mama." "Nobody's replacing your mother, son." Silas's voice was patient but tired. "Miss Nora's here to help, that's all." "Then why's she sleeping in Mama's sewing room? Why'd you give her Mama's quilt?" "Because it's cold, and she needed somewhere warm to sleep. Now go back to bed. You got chores in the morning." "I don't like her." "You don't know her." "I don't want to know her." A door slammed, followed by silence. Nora stayed frozen against her own door, shame burning in her chest. She was an intruder here, an unwanted presence in a house still mourning its dead. What had she expected? The 2 children who'd lost their mother would welcome a strange girl their father had brought home like stray livestock. She should leave, should walk out into the snow and disappear before she caused more pain to people who'd already suffered enough. But where would she go? The thought circled back on itself, the same trap that had caught her at her uncle's cabin. She had nowhere to go. No money, no family, no prospects. She was stuck here, whether the children liked it or not, whether Silas regretted his decision or not, whether she deserved kindness or not. Nora crawled back into bed and pulled the quilt, Hope's quilt, Thomas had called it, over her head. She didn't sleep again, just lay there in the darkness, listening to the house settle and creak around her, wondering what fresh hell the morning would bring. Dawn came late and gray, the sun hidden behind clouds heavy with unshed snow. Nora dressed in her other dress. The gray one was wet from yesterday's journey and hanging over the chair to dry, and studied herself in the small mirror she found in the chest. She looked exactly like what she was, a half-starved girl with 2 large eyes and hair that hadn't been properly brushed in years. Nothing special, nothing worth keeping. She braided her hair as best she could with shaking fingers, pinched her cheeks to bring some color to them, and unlocked her door. The main room was empty but showed signs of recent activity. The fire had been stoked, the table set with 4 plates, the kettle singing softly over the flames. Through the window, Nora could see Silas and Thomas at the barn, the boy carrying a bucket almost as big as he was while his father forked hay. Neither looked happy. "You're up." Nora spun around. Millie stood in the doorway to what must have been the children's room, still in her nightdress, her dark hair tangled around her face. She stared at Nora with those same suspicious eyes from last night. Yes, good morning. Papa says you're supposed to make breakfast." It wasn't quite an accusation, but it was close. "Of course, I can do that." Nora moved toward the stove, then hesitated. "What do you usually have?" "Porridge. Sometimes eggs if the hens are laying." Millie drifted closer, watching Nora's every move. "Can you cook?" "I can try." Mama could cook anything. She made the best biscuits in the whole county, even better than Mrs. Henderson's, and everybody said Mrs. Henderson's were the best. There it was, the comparison Nora had been dreading. She would never be as good as Hope, never be as loved, Never be anything but a poor replacement for someone who'd clearly been extraordinary. I'm sorry, Nora said quietly. About your mother. Millie's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of tears. But she caught herself. I'm going to get dressed. She disappeared back into her room, leaving Nora alone with the stove and her inadequacy. The porridge was a disaster. Nora had made it 1,000 times at her uncle's cabin, but somehow this morning, everything went wrong. She let it boil too hard and it scorched on the bottom. She added too much water trying to fix it and it turned into soup. She burned her hand on the pot handle and dropped the spoon into the fire. By the time Silas and Thomas came in from the barn, stamping snow from their boots, the kitchen smelled like smoke and failure. Something burning? Silas asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. The porridge. I'm sorry, I ruined it. Nora stared down at the lumpy, grayish mess in the pot. I can make more if there's enough oats. There ain't. Thomas dropped his bucket by the door with more force than necessary. Papa bought those oats special, and now they're wasted. Thomas. Silas's voice held a warning. It's true. Mama never wasted food. Your mother wasn't perfect, son. She burned plenty of meals when we were first married. That's a lie. Thomas's face flushed red. Mama was perfect. She was perfect, and now she's dead, and you brought this stranger here to take her place. Nobody's taking anyone's place. Then why is she here? Why'd you bring her, Papa? We don't need her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Nora wanted to sink through the floor, wanted to vanish, wanted to be literally anywhere else in the world. Go to your room, Silas said quietly. But now. Thomas ran. Nora heard his door slam, heard the muffled sound that might have been crying or might have been rage. Millie, who'd been standing in the corner watching everything with wide eyes, slipped away after her brother. Silas stood by the door still holding his gloves, looking older than he had yesterday. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, the weight on his shoulders more visible. I should go, Nora said. Her voice came out steady, which was a miracle considering her insides were shaking apart. I'm causing problems. I'm making everything worse. You've been here less than 12 hours. And I've already managed to turn your son against you and ruin your food. She gestured at the burned porridge. This was a mistake. Your debt to my uncle, I'll find another way to pay it. I'll work in town or I'll figure something out, but I can't stay here. Where will you go? There it was again, that same damned question with no good answer. I don't know, but that's not your problem. Actually, it is. Silas set his gloves on the table and moved to the stove, studying the ruined porridge with the air of someone evaluating a wounded animal. I made you a promise yesterday. Said I'd give you a roof and safety. I don't break my promises. Even when keeping them makes your children miserable? My children are grieving. They'd be miserable no matter what I did. He picked up the pot, apparently impervious to the heat that had burned Nora's hand, and dumped the contents into a bucket. They'll come around. You don't know that? No, he admitted. I don't, but I know they need someone here besides me. I know I can't raise them alone and keep this farm running, and I know that if I send you back to Martin Wynne, he'll kill you inside of a year, maybe less. The blunt truth of it hit Nora like a fist. Because he was right. She'd been dying slowly in that cabin, freezing and starving and being beaten down until there was nothing left of whoever she'd been born to be. So here's what's going to happen, Silas continued, scrubbing out the pot with rough efficiency. You're going to stay. You're going to learn how things work around here. You're going to make mistakes, lots of them probably, and that's fine. We'll figure it out as we go. And the children? The children will adjust. They're strong, stronger than they look. He set the clean pot aside and finally looked at her. But you need to understand something, Nora. This ain't going to be easy. Life out here never is. The work's hard, the winters are harder, and there's barely enough money to keep food on the table. If you stay, you'll be cold and tired and probably hungry more often than not. I can't offer you comfort, can't offer you anything except a locked door and my word that I won't hurt you. That's more than I had before. Something flickered in his eyes, respect maybe, or recognition. All right then, let's start over. First lesson, never let porridge boil hard, keep it at a simmer and stir it every few minutes. He walked her through making a second pot. his instructions patient and clear. This time, the porridge turned out edible. Not good exactly, but not burned. Progress. There, Silas said when it was done. See? Not so hard. You're a better teacher than I expected. Had to learn everything from scratch when Hope died. Couldn't afford to be a bad teacher. He ladled porridge into 4 bowls and called the children. Thomas, Millie! Breakfast! They came reluctantly, Thomas with red eyes and Millie holding her brother's hand. Neither looked at Nora as they sat down. Neither said thank you when Silas set bowls in front of them. The meal was silent and uncomfortable. Nora forced herself to eat, though the porridge tasted like ash in her mouth. Across the table, Thomas glared at his bowl like it had personally offended him. Millie just pushed hers around with her spoon, making patterns in the gray mush. It's good, Papa, Millie finally said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Thank Miss Nora. She made it. You helped. She did the work. Thomas shoved his bowl away. May I be excused? You haven't finished. I'm not hungry. Silas opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Fine. Go, but I want those stalls mucked out before noon. Thomas fled. Millie lingered a moment longer, then followed her brother, leaving her bowl still half full. The door to their room closed with a soft click that was somehow worse than a slam. Nora stared at her hands. I told you this was a mistake. They're children. They're allowed to be angry. They hate me. They don't know you well enough to hate you. Silas finished his porridge, actually finished it, scraping the bowl clean, and stood. Come on, I'll show you around the farm. Shouldn't I clean up first? Leave it. That's the children's chore anyway. He grabbed his coat from the peg by the door, then paused. You still got that coat I lent you? In my room. I can get it. Leave it. You'll need it later. Take this instead. He pulled a second coat from the peg, smaller, patched at the elbows, unmistakably feminine. It was Hope's. Figure she was about your size. Nora's hands froze halfway to the coat. I can't. Why not? It's hers. The children aren't using it. Neither is Hope. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Nora caught the slight hitch before he said his wife's name. No point letting good wool go to waste. She took the coat. It fit almost perfectly, and it was warm. So warm, lined with something soft and carefully mended. Hope Rourke had taken care of her things. Had been the kind of woman who repaired instead of discarding. Everything Nora wasn't. Outside, the world was locked in gray morning light, the sun a pale smudge behind endless clouds. Snow covered everything in uneven drifts, and the wind cut through even Hope's good coat. Silas led Nora across the yard, pointing out structures as they passed. That's the barn. You saw it yesterday. Keeps the horse, 2 cows, some chickens. The smaller building's the smokehouse, though we ain't got much to smoke these days. That one's the root cellar. And that, he pointed to a low, sad-looking structure half buried in snow. That's the privy. Furthest walk you'll ever hate. Despite everything, Nora almost smiled. The well's over there. Pump's broken, so we haul water from the creek when it ain't frozen solid. In winter, we melt snow. He glanced at her. You ever done farm work before? No, sir. I mean, no, Silas. Figured as much. Well, you'll learn. First rule, everything takes longer than you think and twice as much effort. Second rule, something's always broken. Third rule, animals don't care if you're tired or cold or sick. They need tending regardless. Sounds cheerful. Cheerful's for people with money, but there was no real bite to it. Come on, I'll introduce you to the cows. The barn was dark and musty, smelling of hay and manure and animal warmth. The cows, 2 brown Jersey girls with gentle eyes, regarded Nora with placid curiosity. The horse, the bay mare from yesterday, nickered softly when Silas approached. This is Rosie, he said, stroking the mare's nose. She's older than dirt, but steady. Never spooked, never bolted. Saved my life once when I fell through ice on the creek. She dragged me out by my coat collar. Really? Really. Smart as any person and twice as reliable. He moved to the cows. These 2 are Daisy and Belle. Daisy's the lighter one. Belle's got that white spot on her rump. They need milking twice a day, morning and evening. You know how? No? I'll teach you. Tomorrow morning, before breakfast. They spent the next hour in the barn, Silas explaining the rhythms of farm life while Nora tried desperately to remember everything. Feed the chickens first thing, collect eggs, milk the cows, turn them out if the weather permits, muck the stalls, haul water, chop wood, fix whatever broke overnight. Start it all again tomorrow. Sounds impossible, Nora said. It is. That's why I need help. Silas leaned against a support beam, studying her. You think you can do it? I don't know. Honest answer again, you're good at those. He pushed off the beam. Come on, one more thing to show you. He led her behind the barn, up a small rise that offered a view of the farm spread out below. The house, the outbuildings, the fence lines disappearing into snow. It wasn't much. Silas had been right about that, but there was something stubborn about it. Something that refused to quit despite the odds. See that line of trees? Silas pointed to the eastern edge of the property. Just past them is a creek. Good fishing in summer. And beyond that rise to the south, there's a spot where things grow, even when they shouldn't. Hope used to plant lavender there. Said the soil was magic. He was quiet for a moment. She loved this place. More than I did sometimes. She could see what it might be, not just what it was. It must have been hard, Nora said quietly, losing her. Hard doesn't cover it. Hard's when you break an axle or lose a crop. What happened when Hope died? He stopped, his jaw working. I thought about giving up, selling the place, taking the kids somewhere easier. But she loved this farm so much, seemed wrong to abandon it just because things got difficult. Is that why you took me? Because you needed help keeping this place running? Silas was quiet for a long time, his eyes on the horizon. That's part of it, he finally said, but not all of it. What's the rest? The rest is between me and God, and I ain't ready to talk about it yet. He turned back toward the house. Come on, you should learn how to chop wood before Thomas decides to test you on it. The wood chopping lesson was humbling. Nora had watched her uncle chop wood 1,000 times, had assumed it would be simple. Lift the axe, bring it down, split the log. She was wrong. The first time she swung, she missed the log entirely and buried the axe in the chopping block. The second time, she hit the log but at the wrong angle, and it barely dented. The third time, she hit it square but didn't swing hard enough, and the axe stuck halfway through. Stop, Silas said, taking the axe from her shaking hands. You're fighting it. Wood splitting ain't about strength. It's about leverage and rhythm. Watch. He demonstrated, making it look effortless. The axe rose and fell with precise timing, the log splitting clean down the middle with a satisfying crack. See? You're not trying to power through it. You're letting the weight of the axe do the work. Try again. Nora tried. Failed. Tried again. Failed worse. On her 5th attempt, she finally managed to split a log, but by then her hands were raw despite the gloves Silas had given her, and her shoulders were screaming. Good, Silas said. That's enough for today. Your hands will toughen up. They're bleeding. They'll toughen up, he repeated. Come on, we should check on the children. Thomas and Millie were in the barn, as advertised, though mucking out stalls was generous. Thomas was half-heartedly pushing straw around while Millie sat on an overturned bucket, clearly supervising. You call that work? Silas asked. Thomas didn't look up. I'm doing it. You're playing at it. That stall needs actual cleaning, not rearranging. Then you do it. I will not. This is your chore, and you'll do it proper. Silas's voice went hard. And while we're at it, you'll apologize to Miss Nora for your behavior at breakfast. I won't. Thomas, she's not Mama. She'll never be Mama, and I won't pretend she is. Thomas threw down his shovel and turned to face them, tears streaming down his face. I hate her. I hate that she's here, and I hate that you brought her, and I hate that we have to act like everything's fine when it's not. The silence that followed was broken only by the boy's ragged breathing. Silas looked like he'd been punched. Nora felt like she might be sick. And Millie, sitting on her bucket, started to cry silently, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. Go to the house, Silas finally said, his voice rough. Both of you, now. The children ran. Silas stood very still, staring at nothing, his hands clenched at his sides. I'm sorry, Nora whispered. Stop apologizing. stop." He turned to her, and she saw raw pain in his eyes. "This ain't your fault. This is grief, and grief doesn't follow rules. Thomas is angry, and he's got a right to be. His mother died, and his world fell apart, and now there's a stranger in her coat sleeping in her room. Of course he hates it. He hates me. He hates what you represent. There's a difference." Silas rubbed his face with both hands. "Give him time." "How much time?" "I don't know. However much it takes." They stood there in the cold barn, two people who barely knew each other, bound by debts and promises and circumstances neither had chosen. Finally, Silas picked up Thomas's abandoned shovel. "I'll finish this. You should go inside, check on Millie. She'll be scared. She doesn't want me anywhere near her." Want and need are different things. She needs someone right now. Might as well be you. Nora found Millie curled up in the chair by the fire, clutching a rag doll with button eyes. She wasn't crying anymore, but her face was blotchy, and her breathing still hitched occasionally. "May I sit?" Nora asked. Millie shrugged. Not permission exactly, but not refusal either. Nora sat in the other chair, unsure what to say or do. She'd never been around children much. Never had siblings. Never known how to comfort anyone, really. She'd never been comforted herself. "Your brother's very angry," she finally said. "Thomas is always angry now, ever since Mama died." "Were you there? When it happened?" Millie nodded. "She was having the baby. Mrs. Henderson came to help, but something went wrong. There was lots of blood." Her voice went very small. "I heard her screaming. God, this poor child. That must have been frightening. Papa sent us outside, but we could still hear." Millie clutched her doll tighter. "The baby died too. Papa buried them together under the lavender. He wouldn't let us see her after, said she wouldn't want us to remember her that way." He was probably right. "I miss her. Every day I miss her." "I know," Nora said softly. "I miss my mama too." Millie looked up at that, her eyes red-rimmed but curious. "Your mama's dead?" "Both my parents. They died of fever when I was 14. I went to live with my uncle after that." "Was he nice?" "No, he wasn't. Papa's nice, even when he's sad." "I think you're right about that." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Outside, Nora could hear Silas and Thomas talking in the barn, their voices carrying on the wind, though she couldn't make out words. "I don't hate you," Millie said suddenly. "No?" "No. Thomas does, but I don't. You seem sad, like us. Sad people should stick together." Something in Nora's chest loosened slightly. "That's very wise." "That's what Mama used to say. She said the only way to survive hard times is to hold on to each other tight and never let go." Millie studied Nora with those two old eyes. "Are you going to stay?" "I think so, if your father will have me." "He will. Papa keeps his promises." That night, Nora made dinner. She tried to remember everything Silas had taught her that morning. Don't let things burn, stir constantly, add salt gradually. The result was edible, if not impressive. Beans and salt pork with cornbread that was only slightly charred on the bottom. Thomas ate in angry silence, still not looking at anyone. Millie praised the cornbread with transparent insincerity. Silas ate everything on his plate and asked for seconds, which Nora suspected was kindness rather than hunger. After dinner, while the children did dishes, another chore Silas enforced with quiet firmness, Nora retreated to her little room. She lit the lamp and sat on the bed, exhausted in every possible way. Her hands throbbed, her shoulders ached, her heart felt bruised. She pulled out her mother's Bible and opened it to a random page, looking for comfort in familiar words. The pages fell open to Psalms, and her eyes landed on a verse someone, her mother probably, had underlined years ago. "He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds." Nora traced the words with one cracked finger and tried to believe them. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Nora?" Millie's voice, tentative. "Can I come in?" "Of course." The door opened and Millie slipped inside, holding her rag doll and looking younger than her 5 years. "I can't sleep. Thomas is still angry and the wind's too loud." "Would you like to sit with me for a bit?" Millie nodded and climbed up on the bed, settling against Nora's side like it was the most natural thing in the world. She was warm and small and smelled like wood smoke and child. "What's that?" She pointed at the Bible. "It was my mother's. I read it sometimes when I'm scared or lonely. Does it help?" "Sometimes." "Will you read me some? Mama used to read to me before bed." So Nora read, stumbling over words she half remembered from childhood, her voice soft in the lamplight. She read about green pastures and still waters, about valleys of shadow and fear not. She read until Millie's breathing deepened and slowed, until the child was asleep against her shoulder. The door opened quietly, and Silas stood there taking in the scene. "She found you." She was scared. She's always scared at bedtime, used to sleep in our bed, mine and Hope's, until a few months ago. She'd crawl in between us and Hope would sing to her until she fell asleep. He moved closer. I should take her to her own bed. "Let her stay, just for tonight." Nora looked down at the sleeping child. "She's not heavy." "You sure?" "I'm sure." Silas nodded slowly. "All right. Thank you, Nora." "For what?" "For being patient with them, for trying, for staying when most people would have run by now." "I don't have anywhere to run to." "Still, thank you." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Nora shifted carefully so Millie was lying down properly, then pulled the quilt over both of them. Through the window, she could see snow beginning to fall again, soft and steady. In the morning, everything would still be hard. Thomas would still hate her. The work would still be overwhelming. The cold would still bite. But tonight, with a sleeping child warm against her side and a locked door between her and the world, Nora felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Safe. It wasn't much. It wasn't love or acceptance or home, but it was something. And in a life that had given her nothing for so long, something felt like everything. Outside, the snow fell silently, covering the farm in fresh white. And inside her small room, Nora Wynne closed her eyes and dared, just barely dared, to hope that tomorrow might be better than today. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was equal parts exhausting and numbing. Nora woke before dawn each morning, her hands still aching from the previous day's work, and forced herself out of the warm cocoon of quilts into the frigid pre-dawn darkness. She'd learned to dress quickly, layering every piece of clothing she owned against the cold that seemed to live in her bones now. Then came the familiar march of chores: coax the fire back to life, haul water from the creek when the pump stayed frozen, help Silas with the milking while her fingers went numb around the teats of cows who bore her clumsy efforts with patient resignation. Breakfast was still a challenge. Some mornings the porridge turned out edible. Other mornings it burned or stayed lumpy or tasted like the bottom of someone's boot. Silas ate it regardless, never complaining, though she caught him adding extra salt when he thought she wasn't looking. Thomas continued his silent war, pushing food around his plate with theatrical disgust before asking to be excused. Only Millie offered mercy, sometimes sneaking to Nora's side after meals to whisper, "It's getting better, really." The words helped, even when they were lies. 3 weeks into her new life, Nora was hauling another bucket of icy water from the creek when her foot caught on a root hidden beneath the snow. She went down hard, the bucket flying from her hands and emptying across the frozen ground. Pain shot through her knee, sharp enough to make her gasp. For a long moment she just lay there in the snow, staring up at the gray sky, wondering why she was fighting so hard for a life that clearly didn't want her. "You hurt?" Silas appeared above her, blocking out what little light the winter sun provided. "I'm fine." Nora pushed herself up, ignoring the way her knee screamed in protest. "Just clumsy." "That root's caught me twice this winter. Should have warned you." He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was rough and warm, and he pulled her up with an easy strength that reminded her how much bigger he was, how much stronger, how vulnerable she really was out here. But he let go as soon as she was steady, stepping back to give her space like he always did. "Go inside," he said. "I'll get the water. It's my job. Your job's to learn how to survive out here without killing yourself. Hard to do that with a busted knee." He picked up the empty bucket. "Go on, check that leg. If it swells, we'll need to wrap it." Nora limped back to the house, her pride stung worse than her knee. Inside, she found Thomas sitting at the table, supposedly doing sums on a slate board, but actually staring out the window with that familiar angry expression. "You fall?" he asked without looking at her. "Yes." "Figures. City people can't walk on snow." "I'm not from the city." "Might as well be. You don't know nothing about real work." He finally turned to face her, and his eyes were cold. "My mama could carry 2 buckets at once, even when she was expecting. Never dropped them once." The comparison hit exactly where he'd aimed it. Nora felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been holding together through sheer stubbornness. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm not your mother. I'll never be your mother. But I'm trying, Thomas. I'm trying so hard, and all you do is hate me for it." "Good. Maybe if I hate you enough, you'll leave." "Is that what you want? You want me gone?" "Yes." The word exploded out of him. "I want you gone. I want everything back the way it was. I want Mama back and the baby alive, and everything to stop being so hard all the time." His voice broke. "But I can't have that, can I? So yeah, I want you gone. At least then I won't have to look at you wearing her coat and sleeping in her room and pretending to be something you're not." Nora stood there, dripping melted snow onto the floor, watching this 8-year-old boy fall apart with rage and grief he was too young to carry. She wanted to comfort him, wanted to say something that would make it better, but there were no words for this kind of pain. "I'm sorry," she finally managed. "I'm sorry I'm not her. I'm sorry you're hurting. I'm sorry for all of it." "Sorry doesn't fix anything." "No," Nora agreed. "It doesn't." Thomas stared at her for a moment longer, then grabbed his slate and ran to his room, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The sound echoed through the quiet house, followed by the muffled sound of crying. Nora sank into a chair and let her own tears come, silent and hot against her frozen cheeks. She cried for Thomas and his impossible grief. She cried for Millie, trying so hard to be brave. She cried for Silas, working himself to death to keep this place running while his children fell apart. And she cried for herself, trapped in a life she didn't choose, trying to fill shoes that would never fit. "Miss Nora?" Millie's voice was small and scared. "Are you sad?" Nora quickly wiped her eyes. "I'm fine, sweetheart." "You're crying." There was no point in lying to this child who'd already seen too much. "Yes, I am." Millie climbed into Nora's lap, something she'd started doing in the past week, seeking comfort in the way children do when they're desperate for softness in a hard world. "Is it because of Thomas?" "He's hurting. People say mean things when they hurt." "Do you want to leave?" "I don't know." Nora pulled Millie closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Would you miss me if I did?" "Yes. Lots." Millie twisted to look up at her. "I like when you read to me at bedtime, and I like when you braid my hair even though you're not very good at it yet, and I like that you don't get mad when I ask too many questions." "You don't ask too many questions." Mama used to say I did, but she smiled when she said it. Millie traced patterns on Nora's arm. "I think she'd like you. If she could meet you." "You think so?" "Mama liked people who tried hard. She said trying was more important than being good at things." Millie paused. "You try really hard, Miss Nora." Something in Nora's chest cracked open a little wider, letting in light where there'd only been darkness. She kissed the top of Millie's head. "Thank you, sweetheart." They sat like that until Silas came in with the water, his eyebrows rising slightly at the scene, but saying nothing. He just set the bucket down, hung up his coat, and moved to check on Thomas, leaving Nora and Millie in their quiet bubble of comfort. That evening, after another tense dinner where Thomas refused to eat and Millie tried too hard to fill the silence with chatter, Silas caught Nora before she could retreat to her room. "Walk with me," he said, "just for a minute." "It's freezing out." "I know. Walk anyway." She followed him outside, confused. The temperature had dropped even further, and her breath came out in visible clouds. Silas led her around the side of the house to a spot where the wind didn't cut quite so hard. "You thinking about leaving?" he asked without preamble. "I don't know. Maybe. Because of Thomas? Because I don't belong here. Because I'm making everything harder. Because—" She stopped, unsure how to articulate the feeling of being perpetually unwanted. "Because it's easier to run than to stay." That's not fair, isn't it? Silas leaned against the house, studying her. I've been watching you these past weeks, Nora. You work yourself half to death. You take every criticism without fighting back. You try so hard to please everyone that you're disappearing into yourself. What else am I supposed to do? Stand your ground. Fight back. Get angry. He pushed off the wall. You got every right to be furious about this situation. You were sold like property, brought to a place you didn't choose, expected to replace someone you never knew. And instead of being angry about any of it, you just apologize and try harder. Anger doesn't help anything. Neither does being a ghost. His voice gentled. I didn't bring you here to watch you fade away, Nora. I brought you here because I saw someone who deserved better. Someone who might survive if she got half a chance. Maybe you were wrong. I don't think I was. He was quiet for a moment. You want to know why I really took you from Martin? You said you saw someone who needed help. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. Silas looked up at the sky, at the stars beginning to appear between clouds. The day before I came to collect my debt, I was standing at Hope's grave, telling her I was sorry. Sorry for surviving when she didn't. Sorry for being angry at her for dying. Sorry for every petty fight we'd ever had and every time I'd taken her for granted. He paused. And I asked her what I was supposed to do. How I was supposed to keep going when everything felt impossible. What did she say? Nothing. Because she's dead and dead people don't talk no matter how much you need them to. He turned back to Nora. But then I went to your uncle's cabin and I saw you. And I saw someone else who was barely surviving. Someone who needed a chance the same way I needed a reason to keep trying. He stopped, seeming to struggle with his next words. I didn't take you out of pity, Nora. I took you out of hope. Hope that maybe saving someone else might help me save myself. The honesty of it stole her breath. She'd expected many things from Silas Rourke, but not this raw vulnerability. I don't know if I can be what you need, she whispered. I don't know either, but that's not really the question, is it? He met her eyes. The question is, do you want to try? Because if you do, I'll stand by you. Through Thomas's anger and the hard work and all the burnt meals you're probably going to make before you figure out cooking. But if you want to leave, I won't stop you. I'll find you somewhere safe to go, somewhere better than Martin's cabin. There's nowhere better. Then stay. It wasn't quite a plea, but it was close. Stay and fight for this. Not for me or the children or the farm, for yourself, for the person you might become if you stop apologizing for taking up space in the world. Nora stood there in the freezing cold, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. He was offering her something no one ever had, not rescue, but partnership. Not salvation, but the chance to save herself. I'll stay, she said, but I need you to do something for me. Name it. Stop protecting me from Thomas. Let me fight my own battles with him. Nora, I mean it. Every time you step between us, it makes it worse. He needs to be angry at me, and I need to learn how to take it without breaking. She wrapped her arms around herself. I won't survive out here if I keep needing someone to defend me. Silas considered this, then nodded slowly. All right, but if he crosses a line, then I'll handle it, or I won't. Either way, it needs to be my choice. Something that looked like pride flickered in his eyes. All right, you got a deal. He turned back toward the house. Come on, you're freezing, and I still got evening chores. They walked back together, and Nora felt something shift inside her, something that felt almost like strength. The next morning brought new challenges in the form of Eli Turner. Nora was in the barn, struggling to milk Daisy while the cow shifted restlessly when she heard a horse approaching. Through the barn door, she saw a man dismount, younger than Silas but harder looking, with a swagger that immediately put her on edge. Silas, the man called out, you home? Silas emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a rag. Eli, didn't expect to see you. Thought I'd stop by, see how you're managing. Eli's grin was too wide, too familiar. Heard you took yourself a wife. Nora's stomach dropped. She's not my wife, Silas said carefully. She's helping with the farm. Helping. Right. Eli's laugh was knowing and unpleasant. That what we're calling it these days? He spotted Nora then, still holding the milk bucket, and his grin widened. Well, well, she's a young thing, ain't she? Pretty too, once she fills out some. Eli. Silas's voice went hard. Don't. What? I'm just making observations. Eli swaggered closer to the barn. What's your name, girl? Nora, sir. Sir, she's polite too. You train her up yourself, Silas? Eli, I'm warning you. Warning me about what? Can't a man compliment his friend's good fortune? Eli pulled a flask from his coat and took a long drink. Smart move taking a young wife. Keep you warm through the winter, help with the work. Get her pregnant come spring, have yourself some more hands to work the farm. Hell of a plan. The crude calculation in his words made Nora's skin crawl. This was how men like Eli saw women, as livestock to be bred and worked until they broke. She's not my wife, Silas repeated through gritted teeth, and you need to leave. Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive. I'm just saying, a man's got needs, especially a widower. Ain't no shame in taking care of yourself. He took another drink. Took yourself a young wife, eh? Smart man for the cold nights. I didn't marry her for that. The words came out flat and cold. I took her out of pity. Time stopped. Nora heard the words clearly, each one hitting like a physical blow. Pity. He'd taken her out of pity, not hope, like he'd said last night. Not because he saw someone worth saving. Pity. The most humiliating reason possible. The thing that made her less than human, less than worthy, less than anything except an object of charity. She set down the milk bucket very carefully, her hand suddenly steady despite the shaking inside her chest. She walked out of the barn, past Eli's leering face, past Silas reaching for her. She walked back to the house, into her small room, and began packing her flour sack with mechanical precision. Nora, Silas appeared in her doorway. That's not what I meant. Don't. She didn't look at him. Don't make it worse by lying. I'm not lying. Eli was saying things, awful things, and I just wanted to shut him up. By telling him the truth? That you took me out of pity? She finally turned to face him, and she saw him flinch at whatever was in her eyes. Last night you told me you took me out of hope. Which one was real, Silas? The pretty story you told me in the dark, or what you said to your friend just now? Neither. Both. I don't know. He ran a hand through his hair. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. How did you mean it then? I meant, he struggled. I meant I couldn't stand watching Martin hurt you anymore. I meant I saw someone in pain and I wanted to help. Is that pity? Maybe. I don't know what else to call it. So it was pity. She went back to packing. At least now I know where I stand. Where you stand is in my house, as someone I respect and value, as someone you pity. The word tasted like poison. Someone you saved because I was pathetic enough to need saving. Someone you brought home like a stray dog because you couldn't bear to leave me in the cold. That's not fair. Fair? She laughed, and it came out harsh and broken. You want to talk about fair? Fine, let's talk about fair. You made me a promise, Silas. You said you wouldn't touch me unless I asked. You said I was worth more than being treated like property. You looked me in the eyes last night and told me you took me out of hope, not pity. You made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I was something other than a burden someone had to carry. You are. No, I'm not. I'm exactly what I've always been. Someone people tolerate out of obligation or pity or guilt. Your son hates me. Your friend thinks I'm a whore you're keeping for convenience. And you, her voice cracked, you pity me. God, I'd rather be hated than pitied. Nora, please, I'm leaving. She tied her flour sack closed with shaking hands. I don't know where I'm going, but I can't stay here. Not like this. Not knowing that every time you look at me, you see someone who needs your pity. You're being unreasonable. I'm being honest. She picked up her bag. Thank you for the shelter and the food and the locked door, but I'd rather freeze in the snow than spend another minute being someone's charity case. She pushed past him, past Thomas and Millie, who'd appeared in the hallway with wide, frightened eyes, past Eli, who was still outside looking pleased with the chaos he'd caused. She walked away from the farmhouse with her head high and her heart breaking. walked into the snow that had started falling again, walked without knowing where she was going except away. Behind her, she heard Millie crying, heard Thomas saying something angry, heard Silas shouting her name. She didn't stop. The cold hit her almost immediately. She'd left so fast she hadn't taken a coat. Hope's coat was still hanging on the peg by the door. The dress she wore was thin, meant for indoor work, not winter travel. Within minutes, her teeth were chattering. Within 10 minutes, she couldn't feel her fingers. Within 20 minutes, she started to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. But pride, stupid, stubborn pride, kept her moving forward. She followed the road back toward town at first, but the snow was falling harder now, covering her tracks almost as fast as she made them. The world turned white and gray, all landmarks disappearing into the storm. She couldn't see the farmhouse behind her anymore. Couldn't see anything ahead. Just snow and cold, and the growing realization that she might actually die out here. Good, part of her thought. At least it would be her choice. But another part, the part that had survived 5 years with Martin, the part that had learned to endure, balked at the idea of giving up. She wasn't going to die in a snowstorm because of words spoken in anger. She wasn't going to let Silas Rourke's pity be the thing that killed her. Through the white curtain of snow, she spotted a dark shape, a building, or what was left of one. She stumbled toward it, her legs barely working, and found herself at an old trapper's hut. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and the roof was half collapsed, but it was shelter. Barely. Nora collapsed inside, her body shaking so hard her bones ached. The hut offered little protection. Wind cut through gaps in the walls, and snow drifted in through the broken roof. But it was better than being fully exposed. She curled into the driest corner she could find, wrapped her arms around herself, and tried not to think about how cold she was, how tired, how stupid she'd been. Pity. The word echoed in her mind. He'd taken her out of pity. Maybe that was all she deserved. Maybe pity was the best someone like her could hope for, a girl with no family, no skills, no future. Maybe she should have been grateful for it, instead of running away. But God, it hurt. It hurt worse than the cold, worse than her uncle's fists, worse than anything she'd ever felt. Because for 3 weeks, she'd started to hope. Started to believe that maybe she could be something more than pitiful. That maybe, despite Thomas's hatred and the brutal work and the constant failure, she was building toward something better. Now she knew the truth. She was nothing. Would always be nothing. Just someone to be pitied and endured. The cold was getting worse. Nora's shaking had turned to shudders that racked her whole body. Her lips felt numb. Her thoughts were getting fuzzy. She knew, distantly, through the gathering fog in her mind, that this was bad. That she was in real danger now, but she was so tired. And the cold was almost warm now, which probably meant something important, but she couldn't remember what. Her eyes drifted closed. She dreamed of her mother, warm and alive, reading to her from the Bible. She dreamed of her father's laugh, big and booming, filling their small house with joy. She dreamed of being young and safe and loved. Then she dreamed of nothing at all. She woke to voices. Or maybe she was still dreaming because one of the voices was calling her name with an urgency that seemed impossible. "Nora! God damn it, Nora, where are you?" Silas. That was Silas's voice, rough with cold and fear. "Papa! Over here! I see something!" Thomas. That was Thomas, and he sounded scared instead of angry. Nora tried to respond, but her mouth wouldn't work. Tried to move, but her body had forgotten how. She was so cold. So impossibly cold. Then the broken door burst open, and Silas was there, his face white with terror. "Jesus Christ, Thomas, get back to the horse. Ride for home fast as you can. Tell Millie to get the fire going hot and water boiling." "But Papa!" "Now, son!" Footsteps running. Then Silas was gathering her up, and Nora tried to tell him she didn't want his pity, didn't want anything from him, but the words wouldn't come. "Don't you dare!" Silas growled, wrapping her in his coat, the big heavy one he'd lent her that first day. "Don't you dare die on me, Nora Wynne. You hear me? Don't you dare!" He carried her out into the storm, moving with grim determination. Nora's head lolled against his chest, and she could hear his heart pounding, fast and fierce. Could feel his arms locked tight around her, holding her like she was something precious instead of pitiful. "I'm sorry," he was saying, over and over. "God help me, I'm so sorry. You were never pity, Nora. Never. You are. His voice broke. You're my salvation. Do you hear me? My salvation. The words penetrated the fog. Salvation, not pity. Salvation. She tried to hold on to that, tried to believe it, but the darkness was pulling her down again. She let it take her, trusting, for reasons she couldn't explain, that Silas would carry her through. When she woke again, she was warm. Impossibly, wonderfully warm. She was in a bed, her bed, she realized, buried under what felt like every quilt in the house. The fire was roaring, filling the small room with heat, and Silas was there, slumped in a chair beside the bed, his head in his hands. Silas? Her voice came out as a rasp. His head snapped up. You're awake. Thank God. He moved to the bed, his hand reaching for hers, then stopping, hovering. May I check your hands? Make sure there's no frostbite. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He examined her fingers carefully, his touch gentle despite his calluses. No blackening. You got lucky. Another hour and we might have lost these. He moved to check her feet, and she saw his jaw tighten. Toes are all right too. You're going to be sore for a while, but nothing permanent. How long? She managed. You've been out about 6 hours. Sun's almost down. He sat back and she saw the exhaustion on his face, the fear. You scared the hell out of me, Nora. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. He rubbed his face. This is my fault. What I said to Eli, but that was the stupidest, most hurtful thing I could have said, and I said it anyway. I was trying to shut him up, trying to stop him from saying worse things about you, but all I did was say something worse myself. Did you mean it? No. Yes. God, I don't know. He looked at her with raw honesty. I meant that I saw someone suffering, and I wanted to help. If that's pity, then yeah, I felt pity. But it wasn't just pity, Nora. It was recognition. It was hope. It was... He stopped, struggling. It was seeing someone who reminded me why I used to believe the world could be good. I don't understand. When hope died, I gave up, on everything. The only reason I kept going was the children, and some days even that wasn't enough. I was just existing, waiting for something to kill me so I wouldn't have to do it myself. He leaned forward. Then I saw you in that cabin, and I saw someone else who was barely surviving, someone who'd been beaten down but was still standing, still trying, and I thought, maybe if I could help you, maybe if I could give you a chance to become whoever you're supposed to be, maybe that would give me a reason to keep trying too. That's not salvation. That's need. Maybe. But isn't that what salvation is? People needing each other, pulling each other up when they fall? He finally took her hand, his grip warm and solid. I didn't save you, Nora. We're saving each other. We're trying to, anyway. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to trust someone who's seen me at my worst, who's seen how weak I am. You walked into a blizzard rather than stay somewhere you felt small. That's not weak. That's the bravest damn thing I've ever seen. He squeezed her hand. Don't leave again, please. Not like that. What if Thomas never stops hating me? What if I never learn how to do this right? What if I'm always going to be someone who needs saving? Then we'll figure it out together. His voice was rough with emotion. But you have to stay, Nora. You have to give us a chance. Give yourself a chance. She looked at him. This man who'd carried her through a storm, who'd promised not to hurt her and kept that promise even when it would have been easier not to, who was looking at her now like she mattered, and felt something shift in her chest. I'll stay, she whispered. But no more lies. No more pretty words to make me feel better. Just truth, even when it's hard. Deal. He smiled, small and tired, but real. Now rest. You nearly froze to death and your body needs time to recover. Where are the children? Millie's in the kitchen making soup. Well, trying to make soup. Thomas is in the barn. He's been out there since we got back. Is he angry? No, he's scared. When he realized you might actually die, Silas's voice roughened. He rode faster than I've ever seen him ride to get help. Kept asking if you were going to be all right. I think it shook something loose in him. I should talk to him. Later. Right now, you need to sleep. But Nora was already trying to sit up. No. Now. Before he convinces himself to go back to hating me. Silas looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her face stopped him. All right, but I'm coming with you, and if you start to look dizzy, we're coming right back. With Silas's help, Nora made it to the barn. Thomas was there like Silas had said, sitting in the hay next to Rosie's stall, his knees drawn up to his chest. He looked up when they entered, and Nora saw his eyes were red. You're awake, he said, his voice small. I am. Nora moved to sit beside him, ignoring her body's protests. Thanks to you. I didn't do nothing. Papa's the one who found you. But you rode for help. Your father said you were very brave. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I thought you were going to die. Like Mama. I'm sorry I scared you. His voice cracked. I didn't mean for you to leave. I was mad, and I said mean things, but I didn't want you to die. I know. Do you hate me? For being so awful? Nora looked at this boy who'd been carrying grief too big for his small shoulders, who'd lashed out because he didn't know what else to do with his pain. No, Thomas, I don't hate you. I don't hate you either, he whispered. I tried to, but I can't. You're too nice. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry, too, for not being who you needed me to be. Maybe you could just be you. He looked at her shyly. Millie likes you, and Papa smiles more since you came, and maybe I could like you too, if you stayed. Something in Nora's chest cracked wide open, letting in light and warmth and the terrifying possibility of hope. I'd like that very much. Thomas nodded and leaned against her slightly, his small body warm against her side. They sat like that in the quiet barn while the horses shifted and the wind howled outside, and Silas watched from the doorway with something that looked like relief on his weathered face. Later that night, back in her room with Millie curled against one side and a cup of terrible soup cooling on the chest, Nora stared up at the ceiling and thought about salvation, about second chances, about what it meant to be chosen, even imperfectly, even messily, even by someone as broken as herself. Outside, the storm finally broke, and inside her small room with its locked door and borrowed quilts, Nora Wynne closed her eyes and let herself believe, truly believe, that tomorrow might actually be better than today. Spring came slowly to the farm, creeping in like something uncertain of its welcome. First, the snow began to melt in patches, revealing brown earth that looked bruised and tired. Then came the mud, endless, sucking mud that clung to boots and made every step an exhausting effort. The creek swelled with runoff, rushing past its banks and turning the low field into a temporary lake. And finally, tentatively, came the green, small shoots pushing up through dead grass, buds forming on the bare trees, the world remembering how to live again. Nora watched the transformation from the kitchen window as she kneaded bread dough, her hands no longer clumsy with the work. 3 months had passed since the night she'd nearly frozen in the trapper's hut. 3 months of slowly learning how to live in this place, with these people. In this life she hadn't chosen, but was choosing now, day by difficult day. You're getting better at that, Millie observed from her spot at the table, where she was supposed to be practicing her letters but was instead watching Nora work. The bread, I mean, it doesn't come out like rocks anymore. High praise, Nora said, but she smiled as she said it. Millie had become her shadow these past months, following her from chore to chore, asking endless questions, offering commentary on everything from Nora's cooking to her hair to the way she walked. It should have been annoying. Instead, it felt like belonging. Mama used to sing when she made bread, Millie said, her voice careful like she was testing whether this memory was safe to share. Do you know any songs? Not many. My mother used to hum, but I don't remember the tunes anymore. That's sad. Yes, Nora agreed. It is. They were quiet for a moment, the only sound the rhythmic thump of dough against the board. Then Millie said, I could teach you Mama's song, if you want. Nora looked at the child, at her earnest face and hopeful eyes, and felt her throat tighten. This was trust, offered freely. This was Millie saying, "You can have some of her without taking all of her." "I'd like that very much." Millie's face lit up, and she began to hum, a simple melody, sweet and a little sad, the kind of song mothers had probably been singing to children since the beginning of time. Nora hummed along, getting the notes wrong at first, but gradually finding the tune. By the time she shaped the dough into loaves, they were humming together, their voices twining in the warm kitchen. The door opened, bringing in cold air, and Silas, who stopped in the doorway and stared at them with an expression Nora couldn't quite read. "Papa!" Millie jumped up. "I taught Miss Nora Mama's song." "I heard." His voice was rough. Sounded real nice. "Are you sad?" Millie asked with the blunt perception of children. "You look sad." "No, baby girl, not sad. Just—" He trailed off, his eyes meeting Nora's across the kitchen. "Just remembering." Nora looked away first, her hands suddenly clumsy as she covered the loaves with a cloth. She'd gotten better at many things these past months, cooking, milking, chopping wood, managing the children, but she still didn't know what to do with the way Silas looked at her sometimes, like she was something precious, like she was something more than just the girl he'd taken in payment of a debt. "Thomas is asking for you," Silas said, still watching her. "Something about the chickens." "What about them?" "Don't know. He said you'd understand." Nora wiped her hands on her apron and headed for the barn, where she found Thomas crouched in the chicken coop, looking both proud and anxious. "Look," he said, pointing to a nest in the corner. She finally did it. There, nestled in the straw, were 3 small eggs, the first from the young hen Thomas had been raising since Nora arrived. He'd named her Copper for her reddish feathers and had spent hours trying to get her to lay, convinced she was just stubborn rather than too young. "Thomas, this is wonderful." "I know." His grin was huge. "I told Papa she just needed more time, and I was right. Look how perfect they are." Nora crouched beside him, studying the eggs. They were small and brown and perfectly ordinary, but Thomas was looking at them like they were made of gold. "Your father will be so proud." "You think so?" "I know so." She hesitated, then added, "I'm proud of you too." Thomas's face went red, but he smiled. "Thanks, Miss Nora." Then quieter. "I'm glad you stayed, even though I was awful to you at first." "You weren't awful. You were hurting." "I was both." He carefully picked up 1 egg. "But I'm better now. We all are, I think." He was right. They were better. Not healed. Nora wasn't sure any of them would ever be fully healed, but better. The house felt less like a tomb and more like a home. Meals were less tense. Thomas smiled more often than he scowled. Millie had stopped having nightmares every night. And Silas was harder to read. He worked from dawn until long past dark, pushing himself with relentless determination to get the farm ready for spring planting. He was patient with the children, kind to Nora, careful to maintain the respectful distance he'd promised. But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart do strange things. Sometimes their hands would brush while passing tools or plates, and the contact would linger a moment too long. Sometimes he'd smile at something she said, and the smile would reach his eyes, and she'd remember that he'd once been young, before grief carved lines into his face. She didn't know what to do with any of it. "Miss Nora?" Thomas was looking at her curiously. "You all right? You got a funny look." "I'm fine, just thinking." She stood, brushing straw from her skirt. "Come on, let's show your father what Copper did." Silas made a big show of being impressed by the eggs, praising Thomas's patience and dedication. Thomas glowed under the attention, and Nora felt something warm unfold in her chest, watching them together. This was what fathers and sons should be. Easy with each other, proud of each other, building something together, one small achievement at a time. That evening, after the children were in bed and the kitchen was cleaned, Nora found Silas on the porch smoking his pipe and staring at the darkening sky. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. "It's your porch, too." She settled into the chair beside him, pulling her shawl, another of Hope's things that no longer felt like wearing someone else's life, tight against the spring chill. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the frogs start their evening chorus down by the creek. "Thomas was happy today," Silas finally said. "About the eggs." He worked hard for them. He works hard at a lot of things now. You notice that? Silas glanced at her. He's trying to impress you. He's trying to impress you. Maybe both. He drew on his pipe, let out a slow stream of smoke. You're good with them, Nora. Better than I expected. Better than I had any right to hope for. They're easy to love. Are they? Thomas was a terror for months after Hope died. Millie barely spoke. I thought... He stopped, his jaw working. I thought I'd broken them. That my grief had somehow infected them, and they'd never be whole again. Children are resilient. So are you. He turned to face her fully. I've been meaning to say something, but I wasn't sure how, or if I should. Nora's heart started beating faster. What is it? I want to take you somewhere tomorrow, if you're willing. He rushed on before she could respond. It's nothing improper, just a place on the property I think you should see. Takes about an hour to walk there. What kind of place? You'll understand when you see it. His expression was unreadable in the fading light. Will you come? She should say no, should maintain the careful boundaries they'd established, should not do anything that might complicate the fragile peace they'd built. But she found herself nodding anyway. All right, I'll come. The next morning, after breakfast and morning chores, Silas led Nora away from the farm, following a path that wound through still bare trees and over ground just beginning to firm up after the spring thaw. He carried a pack on his back and didn't speak much, just pointed out landmarks occasionally, a lightning-struck oak, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, the place where he'd shot his first deer as a boy. You grew up here? Nora asked. Not on this exact land, but close. My father had a place about 10 miles east, smaller than this, rockier. When I married Hope, her father gave us this property as a wedding gift. His voice went soft. Best thing anyone ever gave me, aside from Hope herself. They crested a small rise and Silas stopped. There, just through those trees. Nora followed his gaze and saw a clearing ahead, and even from a distance she could see the purple. As they got closer, the purple resolved into flowers, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, covering the ground in a riot of color. Lavender, she realized. Wild lavender, growing in impossible abundance. Oh, she breathed. Silas, it's beautiful. Hope planted the first ones when we moved here. Said she loved the smell, and the bees loved them, so everybody won. He moved into the clearing, his boots crushing the fragrant stems. She'd come up here when she needed to think, said it was her cathedral. Nora walked through the lavender, running her hands over the purple blooms. The scent rose up around her, sweet and sharp and alive. Bees hummed contentedly, drunk on pollen. The sun was warm on her shoulders. For a moment, she could almost imagine Hope here, a woman she'd never met but whose absence shaped every day of her life now. Why did you bring me here? She asked quietly. Silas had stopped in the center of the clearing, near a flat stone that might have been placed deliberately. Because I wanted you to see it. Because... He struggled for words. Because you should know about the good things too. Not just the hard parts. Not just the grief and the work and the struggle. There's beauty here too. Hope made sure of that. She must have been remarkable. She was. He sat on the flat stone, and after a moment Nora joined him. She was also stubborn and opinionated, and terrible at keeping track of time. She'd get so caught up in whatever she was doing, baking or sewing or tending her garden, that she'd forget to sleep. I'd find her at 2 a.m, covered in flour or dirt, wondering where the day went. Nora smiled. She sounds wonderful. She was. And she was human, made mistakes, said things she regretted, forgot to feed the chickens so often I finally just took over that chore entirely. He looked at Nora. I don't tell you about her to make you feel like you're competing with a ghost. I tell you because I want you to know who she really was. Not some perfect memory that nobody could live up to. Just a woman who loved this place and these people and did her best. Why are you telling me this now? Because I've been thinking about what Hope would say if she could see us now, and I think... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I think she'd be happy that you're here, that the children are smiling again, that the house feels lived in instead of like a mausoleum. He pulled something from his pack, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. I want to give you something. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a handkerchief, old and soft, embroidered with a single rose in red thread that had faded to pink. "This was Hope's," he said. "She made it when she was learning to embroider. The rose is lopsided, and the stitches are uneven, but she loved it, carried it everywhere." He held it out to Nora. "I want you to have it." Nora's hands trembled as she took it. "Silas, I can't. This belonged to her, and now it belongs to you." His voice was firm. "You're not replacing her, Nora. You couldn't if you tried, but you're building something new here, something that's yours, and I think Hope would want you to have something of hers to carry with you, a blessing from someone who loved this place like you're learning to love it." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks. She clutched the handkerchief like it was something precious, which it was. Not because of its material value, but because of what it represented: acceptance, belonging, the right to make a home here, not despite Hope's memory, but with it. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. For this. For everything. For—" She stopped, unsure how to articulate what she was feeling. "For seeing me, not just as someone who needed saving, but as someone who could save too." Silas was very still beside her. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You did save me, Nora, and the children. We were drowning, and you threw us a rope without even knowing it. I didn't do anything special. You showed up, you stayed, you tried." He turned to face her. "That's everything." They sat like that for a long time, surrounded by lavender and possibility, neither quite ready to break the spell of the moment. Finally, Silas stood and offered her his hand. "Come on. There's one more thing I want to show you." He led her to the edge of the clearing, where two small stones marked the ground beneath an old oak tree. The stones were simple, unmarked, but Nora understood immediately what they were. "Hope and the baby," Silas said quietly. "I couldn't afford proper headstones, so I just used what I could find, but I planted snowdrops around them because those were her favorite spring flower." He crouched beside the graves. "I come up here sometimes, to talk to her, to tell her about the children, to ask her what I should do when I don't know the answer." "What does she say?" "Nothing. But sometimes I feel like I know what she'd think anyway." He touched one of the stones gently. "I think she'd like you, Nora. I think she'd be grateful that you're taking care of her babies, that you're teaching Millie to braid her hair and helping Thomas with his reading and making sure the house doesn't fall into chaos." "I wish I could have met her." "Part of me wishes that too. But then I think, if Hope hadn't died, you'd still be with Martin, still being hurt, still barely surviving." He stood. "Is it wrong to be grateful for something good that came from something terrible?" "I don't know. Maybe that's just how life works. We take what we're given and try to make something worthwhile from it. You're wiser than you look. I'm old enough to know that nothing's ever simple." They started the walk back to the farm, moving slower than they had on the way there, neither quite ready to return to the rhythm of work and responsibility. Halfway back, Silas stopped suddenly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy here?" The question caught her off guard. Happy. Was she happy? She thought about waking up in her small room with Millie sometimes curled against her side. Thought about Thomas's shy smiles when she praised his work. Thought about Silas's quiet presence at meals, solid and reliable. Thought about bread that didn't burn, and cows she could milk without making them skittish, and wood she could chop without missing the log entirely. "I'm happier than I've been in a long time," she said carefully. "Maybe happier than I've ever been." "Good." He smiled, and it transformed his face. "That's good." That evening, while helping Millie get ready for bed, Nora found herself humming Hope's song again. Millie joined in, and they hummed together while Nora braided the girl's hair, a skill she'd finally mastered after weeks of practice and patient instruction from her small teacher. "Miss Nora," Millie said as Nora tied off the braid, "do you think Mama's watching us from heaven?" "I think she might be." "Do you think she's angry that you're here?" Nora considered the question seriously. "No, sweetheart. I think she's grateful, because she loved you and Thomas and your father so much, and she'd want someone to take care of you." "But You're not taking care of us. You're part of us now. Millie turned around to face her. That's different. How is it different? Taking care is something people do because they have to. Being part of us is something you choose. You choose to be here. You choose to love us. Millie's expression was solemn. That makes it better. Nora pulled the child into a hug, breathing in the smell of her hair, soap and wood smoke, and something ineffably sweet. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just didn't know me well enough to notice. Nora laughed, and Millie giggled, and the sound filled the small room with light. Later, much later, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Nora stood at her window looking out at the stars. In her hand she held Hope's handkerchief, her thumb tracing the lopsided rose embroidered in faded thread. She thought about the clearing full of lavender, about graves beneath an oak tree, about a woman she'd never met who'd loved this place fiercely enough to transform it. She thought about Silas and his rough kindness, about the way he looked at her sometimes like she was something worth seeing, about the promise he had made and kept, about the distance he maintained out of respect even though, and this was new, this realization, even though she wasn't sure she wanted that distance anymore. The thought terrified her, but it didn't feel wrong. A soft knock on her door made her jump. Nora, you still awake? She opened the door to find Silas standing there, holding a cup of tea that was probably cold by now. He looked tired and uncertain and somehow younger than usual. Couldn't sleep, he said. Thought you might want some tea. It's probably cold. Probably. He smiled ruefully. I'm not much good at timing. Come in. The words came out before she could think better of them. Just for a minute. He came in, leaving the door open, always proper, always careful, and handed her the cup. Their fingers brushed, and this time neither pulled away. Thank you, she said, for today. For the lavender and the handkerchief and everything. You don't have to keep thanking me. Yes, I do, because nobody ever, her voice caught, nobody ever treated me like I mattered before. Like I was worth something more than whatever use they could get out of me. Nora. He set the cup aside and took both her hands in his. His palms were warm and calloused, familiar now after months of working beside him. You matter, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. And who you are is someone remarkable. I'm not. You are. You're brave and strong and kind. You make my children laugh. You make this house feel like home again. He stopped, seeming to struggle with something. You make me want to be better than I am. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Silas, I don't understand what you're saying. I'm saying that somewhere along the way you stopped being someone I needed to help and became someone He paused, and something like fear crossed his face. Someone I care about, more than I probably should. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Nora knew she should step back, should maintain the boundaries that had kept them safe these past months, should remember that she was here because of a debt, not a choice. But she didn't step back. I care about you too, she whispered. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. We can't. He stopped, his hands tightening on hers. I made you a promise, Nora, that I wouldn't touch you unless you asked. That promise still stands. What if I'm asking? The question seemed to stop time. Silas went very still, searching her face. You don't know what you're saying. Yes, I do. And she did suddenly with absolute clarity. I'm saying that I'm tired of being afraid. I'm saying that I trust you, really trust you, not just because I have to, but because I choose to. I'm saying, she took a shaky breath, I'm saying that maybe we could be something more than two broken people surviving together. Maybe we could be whole. Nora. Her name came out like a prayer. Are you sure? No. But I don't think I'll ever be completely sure about anything. So maybe sure enough is good enough. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His touch was gentle, reverent almost. And when he bent his head to kiss her, it was soft and sweet and nothing like what she'd feared. It was a question, not a demand, a promise, not a taking. When they finally pulled apart, Silas rested his forehead against hers. We're going to do this right, he said quietly. properly. I'm going to court you the way you deserve. And when we're both ready, if we're both ready, we'll figure out what comes next. Court me? We live in the same house. Doesn't matter. You deserve flowers and pretty words and time to be sure this is what you want. He kissed her forehead. You deserve everything, Nora Wynne, and I'm going to spend however long it takes proving that to you. After he left, Nora sat on her bed clutching Hope's handkerchief and trying to make sense of what had just happened. She'd been kissed by Silas, and she'd kissed him back. And the world hadn't ended. In fact, the world felt suddenly full of possibilities she'd never imagined before. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, her hand curled around the handkerchief with its lopsided rose, and for the first time in her 19 years, she dreamed about the future instead of the past. The morning after the kiss, Nora woke to find a wildflower on her windowsill, a single violet, its petals still damp with dew. There was no note, but she knew who'd left it. She pressed the flower between the pages of her mother's Bible and went about her morning chores with a lightness in her step that made Millie stare at her curiously over breakfast. You're smiling, the girl observed. A lot. Am I not allowed to smile? You are. It's just different. You look like you swallowed sunshine. Thomas snorted into his porridge. That's stupid. You can't swallow sunshine. Can too. Miss Nora just did. Silas cleared his throat, his own lips twitching with suppressed amusement. Eat your breakfast, both of you. We got a full day ahead. But his eyes met Nora's across the table, warm and full of promise, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. This was new territory, wanting someone, being wanted in return, and she wasn't sure how to navigate it, especially not with two sharp-eyed children watching their every interaction. The courting, as Silas called it, was subtle at first. Another flower would appear, a dandelion, a sprig of wild honeysuckle, once a cluster of violets tied with string. He'd find reasons to stand close to her while they worked, their shoulders brushing as they washed dishes or their hands touching when he passed her tools. At night, after the children were in bed, they'd sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing, his childhood, her parents, dreams they'd had and lost and might dare to have again. What did you want to be? He asked one evening, before everything went wrong. Nora thought about it, trying to remember the girl she'd been at 14 before grief and cruelty had reshaped her. I think I wanted to be a teacher. I loved books, and I loved the idea of helping children learn. My mother used to say I had patience for explaining things. You still do. I've watched you with Thomas when he's struggling with his reading. You never get frustrated. Just keep finding new ways to help him understand. What about you? Did you always want to be a farmer? God, no. He laughed, the sound rich and unexpected. I wanted to be a sailor. Can you imagine? I grew up landlocked, never saw the ocean, but I read this book about ships and adventure, and I was convinced that was my destiny. What changed? Reality. And my father, who pointed out that sailors need to actually get to the ocean first, and we didn't have money for that kind of foolishness. He stretched his legs out. Then I met Hope, and farming didn't seem so bad anymore. She had a way of making ordinary things feel extraordinary. There was no jealousy in hearing him talk about Hope anymore. Instead, Nora felt grateful for the woman who'd loved this place first, who'd planted lavender and taught her children songs and left behind a legacy of gentle strength. I'm glad she loved you well, Nora said softly. I'm glad too. And I'm glad... He reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. I'm glad I get a second chance. With you. 2 months passed like this. Small touches, stolen moments, a slow building of something that felt solid and real. The children, perceptive as ever, seemed to sense the shift. Thomas started leaving them alone more often, taking Millie outside to check on things whenever Silas and Nora found themselves in close proximity. Millie began asking pointed questions about whether Miss Nora might stay forever, or if Papa might marry again someday, or if it was possible for people to love more than once. Mama loved Papa, she said one afternoon while Nora was teaching her to sew, but she also loved us and her garden and her books, and probably 100 other things. So maybe Papa can love Mama and also love someone else. That makes sense, right? It makes perfect sense, sweetheart. Good. Millie concentrated on her stitches for a moment. Because I think he loves you. And I think you love him back. And I think that's good. You do? Uh-huh. Thomas thinks so too, even though he pretends not to notice things. We talk about it sometimes when Papa thinks we're asleep. She looked up with those two wise eyes. We want you to be happy, Miss Nora. You and Papa both. Nora had to set down her sewing because her hands were shaking. You're very generous, Millie. I'm not being generous, I'm being smart. You're already part of our family. You have been for a long time. This just makes it official. But making it official proved more complicated than a child's simple logic suggested. It started on a Saturday in late spring when Nora was hanging laundry in the yard. She heard a horse approaching and looked up to see a figure she hadn't seen in months, hadn't wanted to see ever again. Martin Wynne sat astride a borrowed horse, looking older and meaner than she remembered. His beard was more matted, his clothes more ragged, his eyes more bloodshot. He swayed slightly in the saddle, clearly drunk even at midday. Well, well, he slurred, if it ain't my ungrateful niece. Nora's blood went cold. She dropped the shirt she'd been hanging and took a step backward. Uncle Martin, what are you doing here? What am I doing here? That's how you greet family? He dismounted clumsily, nearly falling. I come all this way to check on you, make sure that farmer's treating you right, and this is the welcome I get? You need to leave. Leave? This is half my property, girl. That farmer owes me. Silas doesn't owe you anything. The debt was paid. Paid with you, you mean. And I'm thinking maybe I didn't get fair value. Maybe I should renegotiate. He stumbled closer, and Nora could smell the whiskey on him, could see the mean calculation in his eyes. Or maybe you should just come home. That's what family does. They stick together. You're not my family. You never were. That's so. Then I guess you won't mind if I have a word with your farmer friend. Tell him a few things about you, about what a burden you were, about how I fed you and housed you out of the goodness of my heart, and this is how you repay me. The door to the house slammed open, and Silas strode out. He wasn't carrying a weapon, but something in his bearing made him look dangerous anyway. You need to leave, now. Or what, you gonna make me? Martin laughed. I ain't afraid of you, Rourke. Then you're stupider than I thought. Silas moved to stand between Martin and Nora, his body a wall of protection. You got 10 seconds to get back on that horse and ride away. After that, I stopped being polite. Polite? You stole my niece. I saved her from you. There's a difference. Silas's voice went deadly quiet. I know what you did to her, Martin. I've seen the scars. I've watched her flinch from raised voices and sudden movements. I've held her while she cried from nightmares about that cabin. So don't you dare stand there and pretend you were anything but a monster to that girl. Martin's face went red. You got no right. I got every right. She's under my protection now. And if you ever come near her again, if you ever so much as speak her name, I will make you regret it. Are we clear? For a moment, Nora thought Martin might actually try to fight. His hands clenched into fists, his body tensed. But Silas didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there radiating the kind of quiet menace that made Martin, drunk as he was, reconsider. This ain't over, Martin spat. She's my blood. I got rights. You gave up your rights when you traded her like livestock. Now get out of here before I forget I'm trying to be a better man. Martin mounted his horse with difficulty, but before he rode off, he turned back to Nora. You'll regret this, girl. Mark my words. You'll regret choosing him over your own family. Then he was gone, his horse kicking up dust as he rode away. Nora was shaking so hard she thought she might fall. Silas turned to her, his expression softening instantly. You all right? I don't know. I thought I'd never have to see him again. You won't. I'll make sure of it. He pulled her into his arms, and she let herself collapse against him, breathing in his familiar scent of wood smoke and honest sweat. He can't hurt you anymore, Nora. I won't let him. But even as she nodded against his chest, she couldn't shake the cold feeling that this wasn't over, that Martin, in his drunken bitterness, would find some way to make good on his threat. She was right. 3 days later, the sheriff came calling. Sheriff Wade was a decent man by reputation, fair-minded and not easily swayed by rumors. But he looked uncomfortable as he sat at the kitchen table, hat in his hands, explaining why he was there. Got a complaint filed yesterday, he said apologetically. Martin Wynne claims Silas Rourke is keeping his niece against her will. Says she's being held here as an unpaid servant, possibly worse. That's a lie. Nora said immediately. I'm here by choice. I figured as much, miss. But I gotta follow up on complaints, even foolish ones. He looked at Silas. You got any documentation? Marriage certificate, employment contract, anything that shows she's here legally? She's here because I took her from a bad situation, Silas said carefully. Martin was going to trade her to pay a debt. I took her instead. So you did trade for her? Not like that. I gave her a choice, but you did accept her as payment for a debt Martin owed you? Silas's jaw tightened. Yes, but that's going to be a problem, Sheriff Wade sighed. Look, I know Martin Wynn's a drunk and a liar, and I can see with my own eyes that Miss Wynn here is being treated well. But legally speaking, if she was traded as payment for a debt, that puts this whole situation in murky territory. What are you saying? Nora asked, fear creeping into her voice. I'm saying Martin's claiming ownership rights. Says since you're his blood relation and he never officially released you from his guardianship, Silas here had no legal right to take you. The sheriff held up a hand before anyone could interrupt. I know it's ridiculous. I know you're 19 and technically don't need a guardian, but Martin's stirring up trouble and I need to make sure everything's above board. So what do we do? Silas asked. Simplest solution? Get married. Once you're legally wed, Martin's got no claim whatsoever. Sheriff Wade stood, setting his hat back on his head. I'll give you folks a week to sort things out. After that, I gotta bring this before the judge, and who knows what he'll decide. Best to avoid that if you can. After the sheriff left, Nora and Silas sat at the table in stunned silence. From the other room, they could hear the children playing, blissfully unaware of the complications swirling around them. We don't have to do this, Silas finally said. Get married, I mean. We can fight this legally. I'll hire a lawyer. With what money? Nora shook her head. We both know you can barely afford seed for spring planting. A lawyer would bankrupt you. Then we'll figure something else out. Or we could just do what the sheriff suggested. She said it quietly, but the words hung heavy in the air. Get married. Nora, I won't trap you into marriage because of some legal nonsense. That's not how this should happen. You're not trapping me. I'm choosing this. She reached across the table and took his hands. I love you, Silas. I've been too scared to say it out loud, but I do. I love you and your children and this farm and the life we're building together. If getting married makes it legal and keeps Martin away forever, then let's do it. You deserve better than this. Better than a rushed marriage because we're backed into a corner. I deserve exactly this. A man who's kind and patient and treats me like I matter. A family who needs me as much as I need them. A place where I belong. She squeezed his hands. Marry me, Silas. Not because we have to, but because we want to. Because this is our choice, not Martin's, not the sheriff's, not anyone's, but ours. He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw emotions flicker across his face. Doubt, hope, fear, love. Then he smiled, slow and genuine and beautiful. Yes. God, yes. I'll marry you, Nora Wynn. Today, tomorrow, whenever you want. How about Sunday? That gives us a few days to prepare. We can ask the minister to come to the farm, do it simple, just us and the children. You sure? Most girls dream of big weddings. I'm not most girls. And I've learned that the best things in life are usually the simplest ones. They told the children that evening. Thomas's eyes went wide, and for a moment Nora was afraid he'd object. But then he grinned, a huge, genuine grin she'd rarely seen, and said, Does this mean Miss Nora will really stay forever? Forever, Silas confirmed. Good, because she makes better biscuits than you do, Papa. Millie was more direct. She threw herself at Nora with such force they both nearly toppled over. You're going to be our real mama now, our real, actual, official mama. If you'll have me, Nora said, her throat tight. Of course we'll have you. We've been waiting for you to catch up and realize you already are our mama. Millie pulled back, her face serious. Can I call you mama, or do you want me to keep saying Miss Nora? The question broke something open in Nora's chest. You can call me whatever feels right to you, sweetheart. Then I'll call you mama, because that's what you are. Sunday came bright and clear, the kind of spring day that felt like a blessing. The minister arrived at noon. a kind-faced man who'd known hope and didn't seem bothered by the speed of this new marriage. He'd brought his wife to serve as witness, and she helped Nora pin wildflowers in her hair while Millie danced around offering advice. "You look pretty," Millie declared. "Like a fairy princess, but real." Nora wore her best dress, which wasn't saying much, as it was still just a simple homespun thing, but she'd washed and pressed it carefully. Thomas had picked flowers from the lavender field at dawn, and they were scattered across the porch where they'd decided to hold the ceremony. Silas wore his only good shirt, his beard trimmed, his hair combed. He looked nervous and happy, and impossibly dear. They stood together on the porch with the children between them, the minister before them, and spoke simple vows. Silas's voice was steady as he promised to love and cherish her, to stand by her in hardship and joy, to be faithful until death parted them. When it was Nora's turn, she looked into his eyes and promised the same things, but added her own words at the end. "I promise to love your children as my own," she said, "to honor Hope's memory while building something new, to be brave enough to let myself be happy, and to never, ever stop fighting for this family we're making together." The minister pronounced them married, and Silas kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise, while the children cheered and the minister's wife dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Just like that, Nora Wynne became Nora Rourke. The celebration was modest, a meal of roasted chicken that Nora and the minister's wife had prepared together, vegetables from the root cellar, bread that actually turned out well for once, and a cake that Millie had insisted on making herself and was lopsided but delicious. They ate on the porch in the warm afternoon sunshine, and for the first time since her parents died, Nora felt the weight of loneliness lift completely. "Speech," Thomas called out, banging his fork on the table. "Papa has to give a speech." "I do?" Silas looked panicked. "It's tradition," the minister confirmed with an amused smile. Silas stood awkwardly, holding his cup of cider. "I'm not much for speeches, but I want to say—" He looked at Nora, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I want to say that 6 months ago, I was just surviving, going through motions, doing what needed to be done because there were children who needed me. And then Nora came into our lives, and slowly, so slowly I barely noticed, we stopped just surviving and started living again." He paused, seeming to struggle with emotion. "She brought light back into this house, made my children laugh again, reminded me that grief doesn't have to be forever, that it's possible to honor the past while building a future." He raised his cup. "To my wife, who's braver than she knows and stronger than she believes, who took a broken family and helped us remember how to be whole." Everyone raised their cups, even Millie, who was drinking milk instead of cider, and drank to that. Nora was crying, happy tears, the kind she never thought she'd get to cry, and didn't bother trying to hide them. After the minister and his wife left, after the children were finally asleep despite their excitement, Silas and Nora stood together on the porch watching the stars emerge. He held her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, and they didn't speak for a long time. "You nervous?" he finally asked. "About what?" "Tonight. Us. The marriage bed." He said it carefully, and Nora realized he was giving her an out if she needed it, still so careful, even now. "A little," she admitted, "but not afraid. There's a difference." "We don't have to—" "I know. You've been telling me that for 6 months." She turned to face him. "But I want to, Silas. I want to be your wife in every way. I'm ready." What happened next was tender and awkward and sweet. Nothing like the horror stories Nora had heard whispered between women. Nothing like the brutality she'd feared. Silas was patient, constantly checking that she was all right, moving slow, making sure she knew she could stop him at any time. And when it was over and they lay tangled together in sheets that smelled like lavender soap, Nora felt something she'd never expected to feel. Safe. Chosen. Loved. "You all right?" Silas murmured against her hair. "I'm perfect," she whispered back. "I'm home." The weeks that followed were a series of small adjustments to their new reality. Nora moved her few belongings from the sewing room into Silas's room, their room now. She learned to sleep next to someone, to wake with his arm around her waist, to share morning rituals and evening routines. The children adjusted with surprising ease. Millie now calling her mama without hesitation, and Thomas showing his acceptance in quieter ways, asking her opinion on things, seeking her out when he was troubled, defending her fiercely when one of the town children made a snide comment about her having been bought. She wasn't bought, Thomas had said, his voice loud and angry enough that Nora heard about it later. She was rescued, and now she's my mama, and she's worth 10 of your mama, so shut up. He got in trouble for the rudeness, but Nora had never been more proud of anyone in her life. Summer brought its own challenges and joys. The crops grew well, promising a better harvest than the farm had seen in years. Nora's garden, her first real attempt at growing things, produced more vegetables than they could eat, and she learned to preserve them for winter. She got better at everything: cooking, sewing, managing the household, even some of the heavier farm work. Her hands were permanently calloused now, her skin browned by sun, her body stronger than it had ever been. But more than physical changes, she felt different inside. Felt like she was becoming someone new, someone who could laugh freely and speak her mind and take up space without apologizing. Someone who could look in a mirror and not see a burden or a charity case, but a woman with worth and purpose and love. One evening in late summer, while she and Silas were sitting on the porch watching fireflies dance over the fields, he pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden box, clearly handmade. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a ring, simple iron, unadorned, but polished to a dull shine. "Silas, I know we're already married, and I know you don't need a ring to prove anything, but I wanted—" He took it from the box and held it up. "I wanted you to have something that's just yours, not Hope's, not borrowed, not handed down. Something new, for us." Nora held out her hand, trembling slightly, and he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it was made for her, which she realized it had been. He'd made this himself, had spent hours shaping metal by firelight when he thought she was asleep. "I love it," she whispered. "I love you." "I love you too." He kissed her hand right over the ring. "More than I knew I could love anyone again." They sat like that as darkness fell, and Nora thought about the journey that had brought her here. From Martin's frozen cabin to this porch, from despair to hope, from girl to woman to wife to mother. None of it had been easy. None of it had followed any plan or dream she'd ever had. But it was hers. This life, these people, this love, it was all hers. The first frost came in October, but it wasn't the violent, killing frost that had marked Nora's first days at the farm. This one was gentle, painting the grass with silver and making the morning air taste like possibility. Nora stood in the doorway watching it sparkle in early sunlight while Millie practiced her letters at the table, and Thomas helped his father with the morning feeding. She was pregnant. She'd known for about a month, but had kept it to herself, wanting to be absolutely certain before she told anyone. But now she felt it constantly. The slight nausea in mornings, the exhaustion that hit at odd times, the way her body was already beginning to change in small, secret ways. Tonight, she decided. She'd tell Silas tonight. But the day had other plans. She was in the garden, pulling up the last of the carrots before the ground froze solid, when she heard hooves approaching. She looked up to see not one horse, but 3, and her blood went cold when she recognized the lead rider. Martin Wynne, flanked by 2 men she didn't know, rough-looking types who were clearly there for muscle rather than conversation. "Well, well," Martin said, dismounting. "If it ain't Mrs. Rourke, fancy title for a girl who used to sleep in a closet." "Get off our property," Nora said, standing up. Her heart was hammering, but she kept her voice steady. "Our property, that's rich. This is Rourke's property. You're just living here like you lived at my place, as someone else's burden." He moved closer, and the 2 men spread out, clearly trying to intimidate. "I've been thinking about that debt, niece, and I decided I got cheated. So I'm here to collect what's mine. You have no claim on me. I'm married now, legally. Oh, I know all about your quickie marriage. Real convenient, wasn't it? Almost like you were trying to hide something." Martin's smile was ugly. "But see, I talked to a lawyer, a real one, not some country minister, and he says that marriage might not be legal. Says a man can't marry property he acquired through trade. Says maybe the whole thing's invalid." Nora's stomach dropped. "That's not true." "Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. but it'll take a judge to decide. And in the meantime, I'm well within my rights to take back what's mine. Touch her, and you're a dead man." Everyone turned. Silas stood at the corner of the barn, and this time he was holding a rifle. His face was carved from stone, his eyes cold as winter. Thomas stood behind him, holding a pitchfork like a weapon, his young face fierce with protective rage. "Now, Silas, be reasonable. I was reasonable 6 months ago, when I let you ride away instead of beating you senseless. I was reasonable when I paid the sheriff to make sure your complaint went nowhere. But I'm done being reasonable." Silas moved forward, the rifle never wavering. "You're going to get back on those horses and leave, and you're never coming back. Because if you do, if you ever show your face here again, if you ever speak to my wife, if you even think about her, I will kill you. And that's not a threat. That's a promise. You can't. I can. I will. Test me if you don't believe it." Silas chambered around, the sound loud in the quiet morning. "Your friends there look smart enough to know when they're outmatched. I suggest you be smart too." The two hired men exchanged glances, clearly doing the math on how much Martin was paying them versus whether it was worth dying over. They moved toward their horses without waiting for orders. Martin sputtered, his face red with impotent rage. "This ain't over." "Yes," Silas said quietly. "It is. Because you're going to sign a paper releasing any claim you ever had on Nora. Sheriff Wade's got it ready. He's expecting you in town by noon. You sign it, and we're done. You don't sign it, and I swear to God I will hunt you down and finish this. And if I just leave, right away and never sign, then you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when I'm going to show up." Silas's voice was flat, final. "Your choice, Martin, but choose quick, because my patience is about used up." Martin looked at Nora one last time, and she saw hatred there, but also fear. He'd finally realized that Silas wasn't bluffing, that he'd pushed too far and found the edge of something dangerous. "Fine," he spat. "I'll sign your damn paper, but you're making a mistake, Rourke. That girl ain't worth all this trouble." "That's where you're wrong," Silas said. "She's worth everything." Martin rode away, his hired men following. They didn't look back. Nora's legs gave out, and she sat hard on the ground, shaking. Silas set down the rifle and was beside her in an instant, pulling her into his arms. "It's over," he murmured. "It's really over. He can't touch you anymore." "How did you know he'd come?" "Sheriff Wade warned me yesterday. Said Martin had been in town asking questions, looking for loopholes. I've been watching since dawn." He pulled back to look at her. "I meant what I said, Nora. I would have killed him if he'd tried to take you." "I know." She did know. Could see it in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he would do violence to protect what was his. It should have scared her. Instead, she felt safe. Thomas appeared beside them, still holding his pitchfork. "You okay, Mama?" "Mama." The word sent warmth through her chest. "I'm okay, sweetheart, thanks to you and your father. I wasn't going to let him take you. None of us were." He looked at his father. "Right, Papa?" "Right, son." Silas stood and helped Nora up. "Come on, let's go inside. I think we could all use some tea." That evening, after they'd confirmed that Martin had indeed signed the release papers and Sheriff Wade had filed them officially, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Nora told Silas about the baby. His face went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds: shock, joy, fear, wonder. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "How long?" "About 2 months, I think. Baby should come in spring." He gathered her carefully into his arms, like she was made of glass. "A baby. Our baby. Are you happy?" "Happy?" He laughed, and it came out slightly hysterical. "Nora, I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. But yes, God, yes, I'm happy." "You're not worried? After what happened with Hope?" His arms tightened around her. "Of course I'm worried, but we'll get through it. Together. And this time will be different. This time I know what to watch for. This time we'll get help early if anything seems wrong. This time," his voice caught, "this time you're going to be fine, you and the baby both." She wanted to believe him, wanted to push away the fear that whispered about all the things that could go wrong. But she'd learned something in the past year. Fear didn't have to stop you from moving forward. You could be afraid and brave at the same time. We should tell the children, she said, in the morning. Right now, I just want to hold you. So they sat together in the darkness, and Silas's hand rested gently on her still flat stomach where their child was growing, and Nora let herself imagine the future. A baby in the cradle by the fire, Thomas teaching his little sibling to read, Millie singing lullabies she'd learned from Hope, a family growing, healing, becoming whole. Winter came again, but this time Nora wasn't walking into it with nothing. She had a husband who loved her, children who called her mama, a home that welcomed her, and a life growing inside her. She had Hope's handkerchief with its lopsided rose tucked in her pocket, and Silas's iron ring on her finger, and calluses on her hands from honest work. She had survived. More than that, she had lived. The baby came on a warm April morning when the lavender field was just beginning to bloom. The labor was long and frightening, and there were moments when Nora thought about Hope and wondered if this was how it ended, giving life by losing your own. But Silas never left her side, and the midwife from town was capable and calm. And when the baby finally came, a girl, small but healthy and howling with life, Nora felt something in her chest expand so large she thought she might burst from it. "She's perfect," Silas said, his voice thick with tears. "Just perfect." Thomas and Millie crowded into the room, despite orders to stay out, both of them wide-eyed and awed. "She's so tiny," Millie whispered. "Can I hold her?" "In a minute," Nora said. "First, we need to give her a name." They'd discussed it for months, going through every option, never quite agreeing on anything. But now, looking at her daughter's face, so new, so full of possibility, Nora knew exactly what to call her. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Silas's eyes filled with fresh tears. "You sure?" "I'm sure. Because your first wife planted seeds of hope in this ground, and now they're blooming again. Because hope is what brought me here and kept me here and made all of this possible." She looked at her husband. "And because some names are too beautiful not to use twice." So they named their daughter Hope, and she grew strong and happy in a house full of love. Martin never came back. Word eventually reached them that he'd drunk himself to death that following winter, alone and unmourned. The farm prospered, enough that they hired help for harvest and even bought a few more cows. Thomas grew tall and serious, becoming the kind of young man who could be trusted with responsibility. Millie grew bright and curious, always asking questions, always reading, always dreaming big dreams. And Nora grew into herself, into a woman who could look in mirrors and see someone worthy of love, into a mother who knew how to comfort and guide and let go when necessary, into a wife who understood that love wasn't always easy, but was always worth fighting for. Years later, on a summer evening when Hope was old enough to toddle after her older siblings and the lavender field was in full bloom, Nora stood on the porch watching her family and thought about the girl she'd been. 19 years old, sold like livestock, expecting nothing but cruelty. She thought about Silas riding through a blizzard to carry her to safety, about the children who'd learned to trust again, about a woman named Hope who'd left behind a legacy of love strong enough to survive her death. She thought about salvation, how it wasn't something that happened in one moment, but was instead a slow accumulation of choices and chances and grace freely given. "What are you thinking about?" Silas asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Everything," she said, "and nothing. Just how lucky I am." "We're both lucky." "No," she said, turning in his arms to kiss him. "We're blessed. There's a difference." And she meant it, because this life, messy and hard and beautiful and real, was better than any fairy tale. It was earned, fought for, chosen day after day after day. It was hers, and it was enough. The sun set over the lavender field, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, and Nora Rourke stood on her porch surrounded by love and thought. This is what salvation looks like. Not perfection, but wholeness. Not the absence of scars, but the courage to keep living despite them. And for the first time since her parents died, she felt completely, utterly at peace.